Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I have something we need to talk about. This is going to be one of my butterfly chats. And what I want to talk about is finally actually responding to something that I've been seeing for a while, and I kind of wasn't sure what to think of it, or I don't know if it's what to think of it, but just how to really respond in a constructive way. And I'm just seeing so much of it. I feel like I need to talk about it. If you saw my stories on Instagram yesterday, then you probably know somewhat what I'm getting ready to talk about. And by the title of this video, you probably also will have some kind of an idea of what I'm going to talk about. I want to talk about the trend that I'm seeing, or the pattern, the frequency with which I'm seeing this narrative around adoption as this warning against adoption, as this framing the picture of adoption as traumatic and trauma filled and broken, and just all of these negative things connected to adoption. And what triggered me to say something, and what I shared in my stories, was a reel that I saw, basically a statement that adoption is not a cure for infertility, or adoption is not the exact quote is, "We tried everything to have our own kids, so we're just going to adopt," with a very stark audio put to it in response. So just so you see what I mean, let's watch it.
No, no, no.
What?
No, 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 don't.
So you can see they are reacting to the idea of somebody saying, "We've tried so much to have our own, to have biological children, and we just can't. And so we're going to adopt." And the caption of that says, "Adoption is not a backup plan for infertility." I want to say this carefully because I know how much grief can live in this sentence. "We tried everything to have our own kids, so we're going to adopt." You are allowed to grieve the family you imagined, but adoption is not about replacing that loss, because adoption always begins with loss for someone else. A child is not entering your life from a place of neutrality. They are entering from separation, from rupture, from something that came before you. When we frame adoption as a solution to adult longing, we risk centering our healing over a child's reality. And that's where harm can quietly begin. Adoption can be beautiful, adoption can be ethical, adoption can be deeply loving, but only when we shift the lens from "what do we need to complete our family" to "what does this child need given what they've already experienced." So I don't always like myself doing reactive content in this way. I've done it a couple of times, and I always worry, just me, that I'm going to come off harsher than I mean to, or just come off mean, come off emotional, and less like it's a constructive, I'm trying to have this conversation. I get I'm talking to a camera, I'm not talking to the person, right? So there's some constraints on how it's a conversation, but what can I contribute? How can I add to this in a constructive, kind way and respectful? I do not share this to they're not the only account I've seen do. They are not the only account I've seen. Honestly, I've seen it pretty commonly through foster care accounts. And I want to look at the reasons why, and what I feel like they're actually trying to address. But I feel like there's a better way of having this conversation. So, first of all, I do feel like this narrative is one that is very important and applicable for us. I adopted 2 kids. I have lived this. I have navigated the system that these kids are coming through, and I've been the one dealing with social workers. I've been the one dealing with the courts. I've been the one going through that process and navigating everything that has to do with it and navigating a tricky situation. And so, in a lot of ways, this triggers a lot for me to feel like I need to say something because I have experienced this. Now, the account that we just watched that video from, in looking further on her account, she was adopted. And so she is speaking from an adoptee's standpoint and trying to help others understand the experience, trying to support other adoptees, things like that. And I think that's great. And I again, I want to stay nuanced where needed. I don't like the throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I completely get the concerns being brought up. I think the way it's going about it will be less constructive though. So I felt like not only is this my experience, I've I've lived the side of the person adopting, having to navigate that system and all of that. Um, I am the person that, when faced with infertility, couldn't choose to have biological children, and I did want to start a family. I've wanted to be a mom my whole life. And so, yes, when I was having to figure out what I was going to do, what I was going to make for the choice for my life, the choice me and my husband made together. Yes, whether we would adopt or not, how we would approach that, all of that was a part of those conversations because we had no other options. And I think there's an assumption that when that's the case, you're just emotionally running into it without being informed or thinking it through. This is where generalizing becomes dangerous or becomes inaccurate and misses the point. So, not only is there that, right? Like, you guys have watched me go through my journey of adopting our kids, but my whole work has been supporting others with Turner syndrome who, w- one of the biggest symptoms is infertility. So it is very applicable to us when we have to navigate these decisions and seeing this narrative constantly, because I've seen a lot of it. It's not just from one account. I've seen a lot of them. And I don't want to assign malintent to this. I don't believe there is. I truly believe the goal is a good one, and then the concerns are legitimate. I think it's the way you approach it that has risks. And so, as somebody that works to support those of us that have Turner syndrome, have good accurate information, make well-informed decisions, hear from real experiences, this matters to me a lot, and I feel like it is very important to us. I say us because I went through it too. It's hard. And so I want to first talk about this narrative from the foster care adoption process. I know why they're concerned and I get their concerns. The part they're trying to make the point of is that many times in situations of adoption, it is they're coming through foster care. They've come through a very heavy, complicated background, often with trauma already having happened. And you have to be prepared to handle whatever comes of that, whatever that means that child is navigating. And you want to go into that well informed. And many good foster care agencies will tell you that and will speak with you about that before ever placing a child with. The other thing I want to say is they are hoping to make sure nobody that goes down this route is seeing it as a fix. So, I also want to touch on why foster care accounts are pushing this. It is valid concerns, right? Like, you have to be able to handle everything that comes with a whole lot of different things to go through foster care and or foster to adopt. And the argument is there's already so much trauma by the time they get there. Your needs should come second to helping that child heal. And you need to not bring your own stuff into it and put that on the child, which is fair. That is a valid thing. And like I said, most foster agencies will talk about that. In fact, in our interviews with our agency as they were approving us, they asked us our whole history. You go through a whole interview where they ask very blatant, private questions to find where you're at. And some of that does involve why are you interested? And if you say infertility, you know, it, there we got questions on, well, have you processed that? How has that been going? And going deep into the, you don't want to bring that into what you're doing here. And so there's already this understanding. I'm not saying there's not need to be reminders, and I don't think it's wrong to, when you're advising people or sharing information, to have that as a part of it. And like, as you're advocating for people doing this, saying like, hey, there's there's a lot that can be involved in this, and so you do want to think about those things too. But the tone of, again, not just this video, other posts I've seen, one, all they do is list the negatives. They don't talk about redeeming through adoption. They don't talk about the permanency adoption gives the child. They run such a narrative that you should not have your own grief you're bringing into it. You should not have any emotional baggage you're bringing into it. Well, one, I'd argue no parent has zero emotional baggage they bring to being a parent. That's just not possible as humans. We all have our things, right? Not that that doesn't mean you don't process and prepare for it, but like, let's be real. Everybody has things they're bringing. You can't not as a human. And so then there's the narrative of, well, it should be, reunification should be your priority. And so getting into foster care to adopt, you automatically start in a negative light because you're wanting to pull those kids away, or prioritizing your own desire for adoption instead of what's best for the child. There are situations where reunification is not only not what's best, but not possible. You can choose directly to only look at cases that are going towards adoption. Does that mean reunification is no longer a possibility? Possibly not yet, because there could be a potential for, like, in California, a judge will not typically terminate parental rights until a family has been identified because they don't want to just orphan the child. So until a family has been identified, an adoptive family, they typically don't terminate right, which makes sense. But that's on paper. Each case is going to be different for how likely that might be. You never can predict the outcomes. And you can say, like, I really want to focus on these. I really want to look at the cases that are going towards adoption, and that's the path I want to look at, and not just take general foster care placements where reunification would be much more likely and a much bigger goal and still an active plan being worked on. That's different. And those children deserve to have a family that wants to adopt. They deserve to have a family whose mental place is in the idea of permanency and adoption, because that's what they're being taken to. There are so many kids in the system right now. The idea of discouraging people from even trying seems extremely counterproductive. So, for those reasons, I find this narrative really hard. Is it emotional for me? Of course. Of course. And I haven't really known what to do with it, if I'm honest, because I I get their concerns, like I get the advice they're trying to give, but I feel like the way they give it puts people off. Like it feels more anti-adoption than actually worrying about what's best for the child, because not only do those that are already on the adoption line, the adoption route, deserve families being available that want to adopt. And so you want to encourage there to be families available to adopt, but also the other kids who may not be in the position where that decision has been made yet, but are still in limbo, deserve permanency also. Those kids, the kids in the system, the kids you're talking about being adopted, being in foster care, they don't deserve to be left in the system. And if a family was available, maybe that would give them a greater chance at quicker permanency. I'm not saying adoption is always the best route. I'm not. I understand there are situations for both, and it is case by case basis. You cannot know without knowing the details what is best for each particular case. And I fully acknowledge that. It was one of the things I struggled with in the beginning when we were deciding to do it, was the emotional impact of that, of like, because I knew I'm gonna need to be prepared for whatever is decided, and I'm gonna need to be prepared for whatever ends up being best for that case. And I knew I was gonna fall in love with the kids. That was never an option for me. I knew that was gonna happen. So I really worried about how I'd handle that emotionally. Now, our situation was different. It very, very quickly went to the plan was adoption. But I didn't know before we got into it what would happen with any placements we got. And so having this does not change that I can acknowledge there are going to be cases where reunification should still be the goal. But I think you also, on the flip side of that, can't ignore there are cases where adoption should absolutely be the goal. And it should not take years upon years upon years of the kids being in limbo, being run through this system that is overwhelmed, not able to fully keep track and meet their needs, trying to find placements, trying to find homes. They shouldn't have to deal with that any longer than they need to. You want to think about all of the trauma that they've gone through up to that point, which, yes, can be so intense. What's a healthier environment for them to heal from that? Being in limbo in a broken, overwhelmed system, or having a permanent, stable plan, whether it's reunification or adoption, as quickly as possible. It should be what's best for the kids. And that means that process being drug out forever in a day should not happen. I think my biggest concern with that whole narrative is you're encouraging so much more time for the kid to sit in a broken, overwhelmed system and have not any stability, just for the chance that something in that case plan will change, instead of giving it the time due, giving it the real effort, and then figuring out what's best permanency wise for the child. I had a best friend, very best friend, that was in the foster care system 80-90% of her childhood. I, she went in pretty young and aged out. She never had that permanency until she was on her own as an adult and no longer had to deal with the system. And I've seen how hard that is on the kid. I was sitting there listening to her deal with everything the system throws at you, and it sucks. The instability, no matter what age the child is, impacts them. And so permanency is really important. And the system doesn't give you that. So while, yes, you want to be trauma aware, you want to be informed about what you're walking into, you want to know that child or children's history and what they've gone through, what they are going to be dealing with, and the realities of all of that. I don't think the solution to helping people be aware of that is to discourage adoption. And interestingly, the same creator posted another video the very next day. Seems like she got a lot of backlash about that video. And so I want to watch her follow up video.
Yesterday's reel about adoption not being a backup plan for infertility got a lot of flack, so let me clarify what I was and was not saying. I get why this feels so tender. Infertility is brutal. The longing to become a parent is real and valid, and I'm not here to shame people for wanting to grow their family. My point wasn't if you've had infertility, you shouldn't adopt. My point was adoption is not a cure for infertility. Adoptees should never be asked implicitly or explicitly to heal grief for their parent. Adoption starts in separation and loss for the person who is adopted. When parents haven't processed their infertility grief, that unhealed pain can quietly become an adoptee's job. I have to be enough, I have to make it worth it, I can't disappoint them. That's an impossible weight for a child's nervous system. Trauma-informed adoption work is clear. The child's story and loss should be centered, not the adult's need for their pain to have a silver lining. Emotionally available adoptive parents are the ones who have done enough of their own grief work. They can hold their child's questions, anger, sadness without making the child feel responsible for their happiness. I am not anti-adoption. I'm anti-adoption as a solution to adult pain. I'm pro-ethical, adoptee-centered, trauma-informed adoption that says we'll grieve our infertility separate so that our child never has to carry that for us. We'll keep doing our own work so that we can stay emotionally available for them. Multiple truths can coexist. Adoption can bring safety and love and hold profound loss at the same time. We honor adoptees when we let those truths stand together instead of asking them to be our happy ending. My content feels like an attack. My invitation to this is to get curious. Ask what job might my child feel like they have in our family? What grief might I still be carrying that isn't theirs? If you're considering adoption after infertility, please don't skip your own healing. Your future child deserves parents whose grief is theirs to hold and whose love doesn't come with an invisible emotional assignment. Thanks for listening.
So, yes to everything she said. I think my reaction comes from I wish that had been how she had introduced that topic. I wish that same tone and acknowledgement had been in the first video. And I wish there was more of that same nuance and tone to some of these other accounts that I see posting this way, because all it does is discourage people from even trying. You are starting with the negative and the heavy and not even pairing it with the beautiful and the redemptive and the healing that can come from adoption. I think I'd like to see more of that balance because it is true. You do want to mentally and emotionally be in the right headspace to make a decision like adopting. And you don't want to put that heaviness or those invisible expectations in your mind on the child you're adopting. She's right that adoption is not a cure for infertility. It's not. It does not take the pain away from infertility. In fact, I have had in my own experience the nuance of yes, I'm a mom now. I have kids. I have two beautiful kids that I love so dearly, to death. And they're still part of the experiences that I can't get that I grieve. I still grieve the idea of never going through pregnancy and experiencing that, or most people that have experienced it call me crazy for this, but or labor and delivery, giving birth. I still have to grieve those experiences because up to this point, those have not been a part of my story. Adoption didn't cure my infertility. I still can't get pregnant on my own. I will still never naturally, I mean, never say never. God is bigger than everything. If he decided to make it happen, he could. But I do not expect or assume I'm not waiting on or putting pressure on the idea of ever naturally being able to get pregnant and give birth. I have done a lot of work coming to facing those realities and knowing that I kind of just have to process those feelings because I can't control if it's ever going to happen. Not naturally, but if we ever did anything to grow our family that included those experiences, that didn't take that away. It didn't take the 6 years I spent trying to get through the paperwork to adopt and all of the pain in that waiting away. I still hold all of that in me. I still experienced all of that, and that doesn't change that. But yet again, I come back to there's so many kids in the system. And yes, adoption comes out of a situation where a child is separated from their biological parents. And that does have an impact. But that's not the end of the story. There is so much more nuance to it. And with how many kids are in the system, I would never want to discourage somebody from even considering it if they don't feel like they can actually say they've done enough work. Because yes, there's work to do, especially if you're coming at it from an experience of infertility. We've talked about that. I've talked about that endlessly. There is so much grief with infertility that you have to process, and it's a journey. It does not happen instantly. And no, having kids doesn't automatically take all of that away. There is honestly some healing that comes from it, some just feeling of right when you had that desire to be a parent, when you didn't know if it would happen or how it would happen. When, for me personally, feel like part of the calling on your life is to be a parent and you aren't sure how to do that because it's not happening the way that typically would, there's a whole lot of not healing in the it cured it way, but there's a whole lot of like it just feels right when you do finally get to that point. And I think honestly, there's this beautiful match that can happen where a child needs a loving family, a loving, stable, consistent, able to caregive family. And the parents have a desire to do that. That desire is important. That desire isn't nothing. The desire to have kids is not a selfish desire when you feel like that's a calling on your life, when you feel like that is something you want to do. I mean, I don't think it's any different or any more selfish of a desire than having a child naturally when you want to have a child. And that desire can be what brings you through dealing with the system. I talk a lot about the foster care system because that's what we had to navigate. Any form of adoption, any form. International, domestic, infant, private adoption through an agency, foster care and foster to adopt, embryo adoption, any of it. All the different forms that adoption takes include a whole ton of paperwork, like a thick stack of paperwork. It's not like it's easy. And it's a process. It does not happen instantly. Very often, it doesn't actually happen in 9 months. It takes longer than that usually. Not always. There are cases where it doesn't. I'm sure I could be told stories in the comments about quicker adoptions than that or what have you. There's no predictability on how cases go, but most commonly, yeah, it takes longer. And let me tell you, the paperwork is a process. So and it's not most ways are also not cheap. So to go through that whole process takes dedication also and a desire to actually accomplish it. And I know, I think I mentioned being an adoptee herself, I'm sure her focus is mostly on those that are adoptees also rather than the adopters. The I don't really like those terms. I get it. My two kids, I don't even always think about that they're adopted. Like it's not something that I identify them as. So, I don't know. It's just it's something that I can see she's focused on that side of this equation, right? There's two different sides to this equation. 1 plus 1 equals 2. She's focused on this side, but she was commenting and talking to the other side, and in a very generalizing and discouraging way. And I think there's also this tone just in general, not from her, in general, of infertility somehow making that desire selfish or less natural, or I don't know, a bigger deal, more raw something. There's a connotation when infertility is involved that all of a sudden you are too emotional or grief stricken to really think through how you feel about these different options or approach it from a healthy place. That's generalizing. Not everybody even has the same reaction to infertility. I've had a lot of comments from girls that are like, "Yeah, I got married, me and my husband decided we were okay without having kids." And so I think there's just so much generalizing. And for some reason, it seems to feel like it's a tone of, well, if you can't naturally, you have to really think through these other ways of doing it. Okay, I get that. I totally agree with that. My issue isn't with the concerns being brought. My issue is with the tone and uh, the the discouraging of adoption, because that is how it comes across. So my issue is more with the messaging, not the awareness you're trying to bring to the concerns or to the advice of processing your own grief first. Keeping keeping all of that in mind is not bad advice at all. In fact, I think I've talked about that on here too, of like, you really have to do your own processing of the grief side of infertility before you can really fully know how you feel about the other options. And you have to do your research and like be well informed, because man, if finances don't play a big role in your options, that's a whole other conversation. But it's just I think I think with how many kids need permanency, if you're really trying to help adoptees, if you're really trying to help kids, maybe don't discourage people that might be interested in giving a permanent loving family to one of them or multiple. I don't see the benefit of discouraging it in this way. I think there's a better way of getting those things across. I think there's a better way of educating for those things. And I think that's why the backlash was what it was, because people are reacting to, so no one should ever adopt. So just don't adopt. It just could have been done more constructively. And like I said, the tone of her second video was much closer to something I would have never even had a reaction to. I don't think I would have posted it on my stories and said what I did if that had been the beginning of the story, at the beginning of talking about that topic. But that wasn't the case. And so, because of that, and because of this way this impacts us, I wanted to talk about it. I told you guys in my Instagram post, I have thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts, of course. And I hope this was helpful. I don't want to come across as I'm reacting emotionally because it calls me out. I'm the irony of that is not lost on me. I am infertile and adopted 2 kids. I understand. The irony is not lost on me, but my points still stand. The solution is not to discourage adoption wholesale or even put this bad tone or connotation to it. I don't really understand the negative connotation with it. I just don't get it. It's not something that I understand. So I hope for those of you that might also be seeing this narrative, this is helpful. Obviously, being kind, I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Um, I think a lot of you have also navigated adoption or have looked into adoption, things like that. I would love to hear that. I would love to hear your experiences and your thoughts. Um, and yeah, I hope this was helpful. So that's my thoughts on that. Thank you guys for joining me for this TED Talk and having this conversation. This is an important conversation for a lot of reasons. I feel like this is a really important conversation to have because we do need to talk about all the different sides of this. And so I hope this was helpful for thinking some of that through. And honestly, I hope it does encourage some of you to not be scared of adoption if that is the route you are interested in. Yes, it's a process, but it's a process that's worth it. So, okay, I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.